Welcome to Sleep Stories in Rain, where candlelight reveals the warnings people should have obeyed. Tonight, we enter 13 Ouija sessions that began as games and ended with answers no one was ready to hear. A candle goes dark, a mirror is covered too late, an empty chair moves closer, and through the rain, something learns a name. Every story begins with a clear warning, but every player makes the same mistake. They continue. Before we begin, lower the lights, get comfortable, and let the rain settle around you. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. And tell us in the comments, what message from a Ouija board would make you stop immediately? Keep your hands away from the planchette. Some warnings are only given once. Let's begin our first story. The Candle Rule. I was 16 the night we used Mara's Ouija board, and for years afterward I told myself that the worst part had been the candle going out. It wasn't. The worst part was that we lit it again. There were 4 of us in Mara's bedroom that night. Mara, Eli, Tessa, and me. Rain had been falling since late afternoon, soft at first, then steady enough to cover the small sounds of the house. Mara's parents were downstairs watching television. Every so often we heard the floorboards settle beneath their footsteps, but otherwise the second floor felt separate from the rest of the house. Mara had found the board in a cupboard in her grandmother's spare room. It was older than the bright cardboard ones sold in toy shops. The letters were faded, and the surface had small scratches that curved around the alphabet, as if the wooden pointer had traveled the same paths many times. Tessa didn't want to play. She sat cross-legged near the window, watching rain gather and slide down the glass. When Mara placed a short white candle beside the board, Tessa finally turned around. "If we're doing this," she said, "we need one rule." Eli smiled. He always smiled when he was uncomfortable. "Only one?" Tessa ignored him. She pointed to the candle. "If that goes out, we stop. No questions. We say goodbye and we're done." Mara asked why. Tessa hesitated before answering. Her grandmother had once told her that a candle going out during a session did not mean a draft had entered the room. It meant something else had. Eli laughed, but none of us suggested removing the candle. Mara lit it and switched off the bedside lamp. The flame made the room feel smaller. It reflected in the dark window behind Tessa, a second candle floating against the rain. We placed 2 fingers each on the planchette. At first, nothing happened. Mara asked if anyone was there. The planchette remained still. Eli began to push it in little circles until Tessa told him to stop. Then it moved. Slowly, with all 4 of us resisting just enough to know that none of us wanted to admit responsibility, it slid to yes. Mara asked for a name. The planchette crossed the board 1 letter at a time. C-O-L-D. "Cold isn't a name," Eli said. The flame bent sharply toward him. There was no open window. Mara had checked before lighting the candle because the rain was blowing against that side of the house. Still, the flame leaned almost flat, pointing at Eli as if a steady breath were moving through the room. The planchette moved again. R-A-I-N. For a few seconds, all we could hear was the rain tapping the glass. Tessa whispered that we should stop. Mara said the board had not done anything dangerous. It had only described the room. She asked another question. "How many people are here?" The planchette moved to 4. Eli laughed with relief. "See, it can count." Then the candle went out. There was no flicker, no gradual shrinking of the flame. One moment it was burning. The next, the room was dark. Tessa pulled her hands away so quickly that the board shifted on the carpet. "That's it," she said. "We're done." I agreed. Even Mara looked uncertain. We could still hear the rain, but it seemed farther away now, as though the bedroom door had closed on a much larger, emptier room. Eli reached into his pocket. It was a bad wick. Tessa told him not to. He struck his lighter anyway. The flame returned with a small blue edge, and for a moment Eli's face looked unfamiliar in its light. He leaned forward and relit the candle. Before any of us touched the planchette, it began to move. It dragged itself across the board in short, deliberate steps. Y-O-U. Then it paused. I-N-V-I-T-D-D-M-E-B-A-C-K. No one spoke. Eli's lighter slipped from his hand and landed beside his knee. Tessa began saying goodbye, but Mara stopped her. She wanted to know what the message meant. She placed her fingers back on the planchette, and after a moment, Eli did too. "I should have left then. Tessa should have left with me." Instead, we stayed because leaving the others felt worse than continuing. We put our hands back on the board. Mara asked how many people were in the room now. The planchette moved to 4 again. "There are 4 of us," Eli said quietly. The planchette moved to no. Then it spelled, "One left early." Footsteps crossed the hallway outside Mara's bedroom. They were slow, with a pause between each step. Mara's parents' bedroom was at the other end of the hall, but the steps did not come from there. They began beside Mara's door and moved away, toward the stairs. Mara called for her mother. No one answered. The candle flame turned blue. Not blue at the base, the way a normal flame sometimes changes, but entirely blue from wick to tip. It gave almost no light. The planchette moved beneath our fingers. "Put it out yourself." We argued in whispers about what it meant. Tessa thought it meant the candle. Eli thought it meant the board. Mara said it might mean whatever had walked into the hall. Then she asked the question none of us should have asked. "What do you want?" The planchette moved once more. The dark. Tessa said goodbye firmly. This time we all repeated it. The planchette slid to goodbye and stopped. I reached for the candle and blew it out. In the darkness, someone whispered from the hallway. "Light it again." It sounded like Eli. But Eli was sitting beside me, holding his breath. We turned on every light and went downstairs together. Mara's parents were asleep on the sofa with the television still playing. They had not walked upstairs. They had not heard Mara call. None of us returned to the bedroom until morning. The candle had burned all the way down to Mara's small wooden table. Wax covered the board and had hardened around the planchette. None of us remembered relighting it. The lighter was still on the carpet where Eli had dropped it. Mara used a kitchen knife to lift the wax from the table. Underneath it, cut into the wood in narrow, uneven letters, was a single word. Back. We never used the board again. But for several months afterward, whenever rain struck my bedroom window at night, I would wake to the smell of warm candle wax. And sometimes, just before falling asleep again, I would hear a voice from the hallway asking very softly for a light. Some warnings are easy to understand only after they have already been broken. The next one was written down before the board was ever opened. The sleepover dare. Claire's mother called the basement at 1:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the red numbers on the cable box were the brightest thing in the room when the phone began to ring. It was Hannah's 13th birthday, and 5 of us were sleeping in the finished basement of her parents' house. Earlier that evening, the rooms upstairs had been full of music, relatives, paper plates, and adults calling down the stairs to ask whether we needed anything. By midnight, the house had gone quiet. The narrow basement windows near the ceiling showed only black glass, and the pipes clicked whenever the heating came on. There was Hannah, whose birthday it was. Juno had brought the Ouija board. Beth wanted nothing to do with it. Claire was the youngest of us by almost a year, and I was the one who kept pretending the whole thing was funny because everyone else was doing the same. Juno carried the board into the basement wrapped in a bath towel. She said her older sister had taken it from a friend's house and would notice if it was missing, so we had to put it back before morning. Beth asked why it was wrapped up. Juno said the box was damaged. When she opened the towel, the box looked fine. The board itself was pale and newer than the one people imagine when they tell ghost stories. The letters were printed cleanly. The plastic planchette had a clear circle in the middle. It looked ordinary enough that we relaxed when Juno placed it on the carpet between our sleeping bags. Hannah invented the dare. Everyone had to ask one question. No skipping a turn, no asking for someone else, and no pulling your fingers away until the answer was finished. Claire said she did not want to play. Her mother had nearly refused to let her attend the sleepover. She was strict about where Claire stayed, who would be present, and whether parents were home. We had already teased Claire about the 3 phone calls her mother made that evening to check on her. Before the last call ended, Claire's mother made her repeat a promise. If anything felt wrong, she would call her. Claire repeated it while the rest of us listened and tried not to laugh. Hannah told her that refusing would prove her mother was right to treat her like a child. I wish I could say I defended Claire. I didn't. I told her it would take less than a minute. We began with harmless questions. Hannah asked what color she should paint her bedroom. The planchette moved to B, then L, then U, then E. Her room was already blue, and that made us laugh. Juno asked for the first initial of the person she would marry. The board chose M. She immediately named 3 boys from school whose names began with M. Beth asked whether we should stop playing. The planchette moved to yes. We laughed at that too. Then it was Claire's turn. She held her fingertips so lightly on the plastic that they barely touched it. "Is there anyone here for me?" she asked. The planchette moved almost immediately. Yes. Claire looked at Juno, certain she was pushing it. "Who?" The planchette traveled to M, then O, then M. "Mom." Hannah covered her mouth to keep from laughing loudly enough to wake her parents. Juno said even the spirits knew Claire's mother never left her alone. Claire did not laugh. She glanced toward the basement telephone on the small desk beside the stairs. The planchette began moving again. "CALLHE, call her." Beth told us to stop. She said the board had answered her question too, and we were ignoring it. Claire reached toward the telephone, but Juno caught her wrist. "You haven't finished your turn," she said. Hannah agreed. Calling Claire's mother after 1 in the morning would end the sleepover for all of us. Her mother would call Hannah's parents. The adults would come downstairs, find the board, and send everyone home. Claire slowly placed her fingers back on the planchette. Before she asked another question, it moved. "Hall." Then it stopped. "Which hall?" Hannah asked. The planchette moved again. "She heard you." At that moment, the telephone upstairs rang once, only once. It stopped so abruptly that none of us were sure it had really happened. Hannah said it was probably a wrong number. Juno said maybe someone upstairs had answered it. Claire shook her head. "My mom lets it ring 4 times, she said. It was a strange detail, but she sounded certain. Her mother believed answering too quickly made callers think you had been waiting beside the phone. The 5 of us sat without moving. Rain whispered against the windows. Somewhere above us, a floorboard gave a small, dry creak. Then the basement telephone rang. Claire pulled her hands from the board and answered before anyone could stop her. She did not say hello. She only listened. Her face changed slowly. The fear came first, then confusion, then something like shame. "Mom," she said, "I didn't call you." We could hear a woman's voice through the receiver, thin and uneven. Claire's mother was crying. Claire asked her to repeat what she had heard. Then she looked toward the stairs. Her mother said the home telephone had rung at 1:14. When she answered, Claire had whispered from the other end, "Mom, come get me." The voice had sounded far away, as if Claire were standing at the end of a long hallway. Rain had been falling around her. Though Claire was supposed to be inside Hannah's house, Claire told her mother she was safe in the basement. Her mother asked why then. She could still hear Claire breathing on the other line. The basement phone went silent. Not disconnected. Silent. Claire's mother was still there, but the faint crying had stopped. Then another voice came through the receiver. It sounded like Claire, speaking very quietly. "She didn't call." Claire dropped the phone. Hannah ran upstairs for her parents. The rest of us followed, leaving the board open on the basement carpet. Claire's mother arrived less than 15 minutes later, still wearing slippers under her coat. She took Claire home without asking about the board. The next morning, Hannah's father found the front door locked and the security chain still fastened. Nothing in the house appeared disturbed. But the hallway between the front door and the basement stairs was marked with wet footprints. They were small, about Claire's size. They began in the middle of the hallway rather than at the door. They crossed the wooden floor, descended 3 steps toward the basement, and stopped. There were no prints leading back. We cleaned them before Hannah's relatives returned for breakfast. None of us discussed the board again. Juno wrapped it in the towel and took it home, though she later claimed it was not the same board she had brought. She said the clear window in the planchette had turned cloudy overnight. Claire stopped coming to sleepovers after that. Years later, I asked whether her mother still remembered the call. Claire said she did, but the memory had changed around the edges. Her mother could no longer remember the exact words or whether the voice had truly sounded like Claire. She remembered only one detail clearly. The voice on the telephone sounded wet, not as though Claire were crying. as though she were speaking through rain. That call came from inside a house full of witnesses. This next story is quieter. An apartment, an old board, and a name that should have stayed hidden. The wrong name. The first apartment Lena and I shared was the second floor of an old duplex on Merrow Street. It had been renovated just enough to look new in photographs. Fresh white paint, new cabinet handles, a bathroom mirror with the sticker still on one corner. But the bones of the place were older. The floor leaned slightly toward the hallway, the bedroom never held heat, and the narrow closet beside the bathroom smelled faintly of wet plaster, no matter how many times we aired it out. It rained the entire week we moved in. Not hard rain, just steady, patient rain that darkened the bricks outside and made the gutters tick through the night. We carried boxes upstairs under plastic bags and towels, laughing at first, then moving in silence by the third day because everything we owned felt damp. The landlord told us the previous tenant had been an older man named Peter Hask. He had lived there for 8 years, kept to himself, paid on time, and moved to be closer to his daughter. That was all she said about him. Lena did not like the hallway closet. It was too shallow for coats and too deep to be useless. The back wall looked newer than the rest, a panel of thin plywood painted the same white as the trim. On our fourth night, while I was trying to fit a vacuum cleaner inside, the panel shifted under my hand. Behind it was a narrow gap between the wall studs. Inside the gap, wrapped in a brittle paper grocery bag, was a Ouija board. I expected Lena to laugh when I showed her. She didn't. She looked at the board, then at the open closet, then told me to put it in the trash. It was older than the boards I had seen before. Dark wood, yellowed letters, a planchette with a cloudy glass circle in the center. The surface was scratched, but not randomly. Most of the marks gathered around the lower half of the alphabet, as if whoever had used it had kept dragging the pointer over the same few letters. On the back, someone had cut 4 words into the wood. Do not open it. Lena thought it meant the closet. I said it probably meant the board's box, though there was no box anywhere in the wall. I said it was probably Peter's. Lena said that made it worse. I should have listened to her. Instead, after dinner, with rain ticking against the kitchen window and half our plates still packed in newspaper, I set the board on the living room floor. Once, I said, then we throw it out. Lena agreed only because she wanted to prove there was nothing to it. We sat across from each other, knees almost touching, with the board between us. The apartment smelled like cardboard, paint, and rain. We placed 2 fingers each on the planchette. I asked if anyone was there. Nothing moved. Lena looked relieved. Then the planchette slid to yes. Not quickly, not dramatically. It moved with the slow confidence of something being pulled by a string from under the floor. I asked if we were speaking to Peter Hask. The planchette moved to no. Lena whispered that we should stop. I asked who was there. The planchette moved from letter to letter. V-E-R-A, then it paused before continuing. V-O-S-S, Veravos. Neither of us knew the name. I remember feeling disappointed for half a second, which seems absurd now. Some part of me had expected either nonsense or a clear connection to the previous tenant. A random name felt like an unfinished joke. Lena asked if Veravos had lived in the apartment. The planchette moved to no. I asked if she had died there. Again, no. The rain tapped the window behind me. Somewhere below us, in the first-floor unit, a pipe knocked once and went still. Lena said, "Ask one more thing, then goodbye." I asked, "Where are you?" The planchette moved to UNDER, under. Lena pulled her hands back. "No," she said. "Goodbye now." But I asked because of course I did. Because under could mean downstairs. Under could mean the first-floor apartment. Under could mean basement. It was vague enough to invite one more question. Under what? The planchette moved so hard the board shifted on the floorboards. D-O-N-O-T, then O-P-E-N, do not open. Lena said goodbye. I said it with her. The planchette moved to goodbye and stopped. We threw the board into the outside bin that night. I remember lifting the lid in the rain, dropping the board in, and watching water bead on the cloudy glass of the planchette before the lid closed. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then the hallway closet began opening by itself, not swinging wide, just a few inches each morning, enough to show the dark line between the door and the frame. I blamed the slant in the floor. Lena blamed the building settling. Neither of us mentioned the board. On the third morning, there was water on the floorboards outside the closet. It wasn't a puddle. It looked more like someone had pressed a wet hand against the wood and dragged it toward the bedroom. The windows were closed. The ceiling was dry. The bathroom pipes were fine. That night, Lena woke me and told me to listen. At first, all I heard was rain. Then, beneath the bed or beneath the floor under the bed, something whispered. Not a word. Not yet. Just the shape of a voice trying to find a mouth. The next morning, while Lena was at work, I took a screwdriver to the floorboard nearest the closet. I told myself I was checking for water damage. The board came up more easily than it should have. Under it was a strip of old wallpaper, folded into a long narrow square and pressed into the dust between the joists. I unfolded it on the hallway floor. The paper was brittle and patterned with faded blue flowers. On the blank back, scratched so deeply the letters nearly tore through, was the name, Vera Voss. Beneath it was a date from 1978. Beneath that was one more word, waiting. I called the landlord before Lena came home. I asked whether anyone named Vera Voss had ever lived in the building. She said no. I asked whether someone had died there. She said not that she knew of, then became very quiet. A minute later, she told me Peter Hask had complained about the closet too. He had said it would not stay shut. She laughed as if this were a harmless coincidence and told me old houses had habits. When Lena came home, the Ouija board was back inside the closet. It was standing upright behind the loose panel, dry as bone. The planchette rested in the center of the board. Not on yes, not on goodbye, on open. We left the apartment 3 weeks later. We told the landlord there was mold. In a way, maybe there was. Something old living under a surface, spreading quietly where the light could not reach. On our last night, after the movers had taken everything except a mattress and 2 suitcases, the rain started again. Lena and I lay awake in the empty bedroom, listening to water run through the gutters. Just after 2 in the morning, the closet door clicked open. Then the floorboard beneath it knocked once from below. Not loudly, politely, as if something had waited long enough and was asking to be let in. The first 3 stories used voices, phones, and hidden floorboards. Now the warning moves into something visual, a mirror that should have stayed covered. The mirror warning. Devin brought the mirror home on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of a storm. It was too large for the apartment and too heavy for the wall. Its carved wooden frame had gone almost black, and the old glass bent straight lines when viewed from the side. He found it at a thrift store 2 blocks from campus and carried it home by himself in the rain. The woman at the counter wrapped the glass in an old blanket and told him to keep it covered after dark. Devin thought she was protecting herself from a return when he discovered the silvering had gone bad. Both things became important later. None of us could move it the same way again, and we left it uncovered every night. There were 3 of us in the apartment then, Devin, Sam, and me. The mirror leaned against the living room wall for weeks because Devin never found studs strong enough to hold it. I hated sitting with my back to it. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Movement simply arrived in the glass a moment late, as if it needed time to remember what people were supposed to do. Sam noticed it too, though he pretended not to. The night we used the board, rain turned the windows black. Devin had found a cheap Ouija board at the same thrift store and said the 2 objects belonged together. Sam told him that was exactly why we should not use either one. Devin laughed and set the board on the coffee table. The mirror stood behind us, angled slightly toward the room. Devin sat nearest the television. Sam sat across from him, already regretting the whole thing. I could see the mirror over Devin's shoulder. The planchette looked too small on the board, a cheap plastic triangle between our hands. Devin touched it first and said, "Show us something." It went to yes almost immediately. The quick answer made the room feel crowded. Sam wanted to stop. Devin said it proved only that one of us was impatient. He asked how many people were in the room. It answered 3. Then he asked what it wanted. The planchette slid from letter to letter. GLAS. Sam's hands lifted slightly, but not enough to break contact. "Why glass?" he asked. The planchette moved so sharply that all 3 of us leaned forward with it. mirror. I looked up before I meant to. In the mirror, I saw the three of us around the coffee table. Devon's shoulders were hunched. Sam's face looked pale. My own reflection was turned toward the glass, eyes open too wide. For a second, nothing was wrong. Then Devon asked, "What about the mirror?" The planchette moved under our fingers. COVERIT. Cover it. Sam reached for the blanket folded over the arm of the sofa. Devon stopped him. "No," he said. "That's too easy. One of you is doing this because you know he hates that thing." I told him I was not moving it. Sam said the same. Devon asked another question anyway. "Why should we cover it?" The planchette paused. Then, okay. Do not look. We all looked. That is the part I still come back to. The warning was simple. It was not vague or symbolic. It did not require interpretation. It told us not to look, and all three of us turned toward the mirror as if the words had pulled our faces in that direction. At first, the reflection showed the same room. Then it showed 4 people at the table. The fourth shape sat between Sam and me. It was only visible in the glass. Not clear, not solid, just a darker place in the room where a person would have been if the apartment had been a little more crowded. I saw the curve of a shoulder. I saw something like hair hanging forward. I saw one hand resting near the planchette. When I turned around, there was nothing between Sam and me except carpet. Sam made a small sound, almost a breath and almost a word. The planchette began moving again. ITSTAYS. We took our hands away. The board moved without us touching it. ITLEA. RNSYOU. It learns you. Then, cover it now. Sam grabbed the blanket and threw it at Devon, who finally stood. He stepped toward the mirror with the blanket in both hands. His reflection did not stand. In the glass, Devon remained seated on the floor, smiling faintly at the board. The real Devon stopped moving. For 3 or 4 seconds, the apartment was absolutely still, except for the rain. Then the seated reflection turned its head and looked at him. Devon covered the mirror. The blanket fell over the glass, and the room seemed to loosen around us. Sam said goodbye in a shaking voice, even though none of our hands were on the planchette. I repeated it. Devon did too, still facing the covered mirror. We left the blanket there all night. In the morning, the blanket was still in place and the board remained on the coffee table. For a moment, the apartment looked like itself again. Then Sam lifted the blanket. The mirror glass was covered in handprints, not on the outside. We wiped the surface with a towel, but the prints did not smear. They were pressed from within the glass, pale and cloudy, palms flattened as if someone had leaned from the other side and tried to push through. 3 sets matched our hands. Devon checked because he had to. He placed his palm against one of the prints, then Sam did, then I did. The sizes were close enough to make us stop talking. The 4th set was smaller. Its fingers rested lower on the glass, near the height of the coffee table. We tried to move the mirror into the hall that afternoon. It would not lift. Devon had carried it home alone in the rain, but the 3 of us could barely shift it an inch across the floor. It felt attached to the wall, though nothing held it there. When we moved out months later, Devon left it behind. The landlord called a week after we returned the keys and asked if we had forgotten a mirror. Devon said it had been there when we moved in. That was not true, but none of us corrected him. Sometimes I wonder what the next tenants saw when they sat in that living room, whether they noticed that the mirror reflected movement a little late, whether they covered it when the room began to feel occupied. I hope they did, because the last time I saw it, as we closed the apartment door for good, the blanket was gone from the floor where we had left it folded. In the mirror, behind our empty living room, 4 people were still sitting around the coffee table. One of them was looking directly at me. The mirror asked them not to look. The next board asks for something simpler and somehow harder to obey. Lock the hallway door. The locked door. My brother Miles was always braver when our parents were not home. That was how I understood it when I was 12. He was 15, taller than me, louder than me, and old enough to make being scared look like something you chose not to do. If the house creaked, he said it was pipes. If I asked him to turn on more lights, he turned one off instead. The night with the board was a rainy Saturday in October. Our parents had gone to a late anniversary dinner across town and left Miles in charge. That meant frozen pizza, the television too loud, and Miles pretending he was not checking the clock every 20 minutes. Our house was not large, but it had a strange layout. The dining room opened into a narrow back hallway that led to the laundry room, the pantry, and the basement stairs. That hallway always felt colder than the rest of the house. Even in summer, you could feel a thin line of cool air across your ankles. The hall door was an old interior door with a brass lock. No one used the lock because there was no reason to lock a hallway inside your own house. At least, that was what Miles said. He found the Ouija board in the closet under the stairs while looking for a deck of cards. The box was soft at the corners, and the planchette was missing. Inside the lid, someone had written a rule in blue ink. Lock the hall door before you ask. Miles said it was probably something our father wrote to scare us. Then he said the missing planchette made the game better. We could use something else. He emptied his pocket and placed a quarter in the center of the board. There, he said. Budget ghost equipment. I told him I did not want to play. He said we were only asking a few questions. If anything happened, I could blame him. That was the kind of offer older brothers make when they know nothing will happen. We sat at the dining room table. Rain clicked against the kitchen window behind me. The television kept talking in the living room, its voices muffled like people speaking through a wall. Miles put 2 fingers on the quarter. I put 2 fingers beside his. Is anyone here? He asked. The quarter did not move. Miles pushed it in a circle and made a low moaning sound until I told him to stop. He laughed, then asked again. This time the quarter moved to yes. I knew Miles was doing it. I could feel the pressure of his fingers through the coin. But he looked surprised enough that I did not say anything. How many people are in the room? He asked. The quarter slid to 2. See? Miles said. Accurate. Then it moved again. HALL. Miles looked toward the closed door to the back hallway. I did too. Nothing happened. The rain kept tapping the window. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere in the living room, canned laughter rose and fell from the television. Miles asked, "What about the hall?" The quarter moved 1 letter at a time. LOCK then, THEHALLDOOR, lock the hall door. I took my hand off the coin. Miles smiled, but not the way he did when he was joking. You're doing that, he said. I told him I wasn't. The hallway door stood about 6 feet from the table. I could see the brass lock. I could have crossed the room and turned it in less than 2 seconds. Let's just lock it, I said. Miles leaned back in his chair. It's a hallway. You don't lock a hallway. That was the first warning. Clear, practical, easy to obey. We ignored it because obeying it would have meant admitting the board had told us something worth doing. Miles put his fingers back on the quarter. I didn't. The coin moved anyway, just an inch at first, then farther. TOOLTE. Too late. The hallway door clicked shut. It had already been closed. That is what I need you to understand. The door had been closed the whole time, but the sound was unmistakable. It was the sound a latch makes when it settles fully into place. Miles stared at it. Then came the lock, a slow metallic turn from the other side. I began to cry, not loudly, just enough that Miles looked angry at me for making the fear visible. Mom probably locked it earlier, he said. He stood and went to the door. The quarter moved across the board without either of us touching it. HEAR Miles reached for the knob. From the other side of the door came a dragging sound. It was not footsteps. Footsteps have rhythm. This was slower. A soft pull across the tile, then a pause, then another pull, like someone moving one socked foot because the other would not lift. Miles let go of the knob. The dragging stopped. The quarter moved again. NEXT, Miles turned around. Stop, he said. I told him I wasn't touching it. He came back to the table and grabbed the quarter, but it slid from under his fingers and dropped off the edge. It hit the floor once and rolled toward the hallway door. Neither of us moved. The coin rolled in a clean line across the dining room, as if pulled by a thread. It stopped under the door, half in the dining room, half in the hallway. Then something on the other side pressed it back toward us, just a little, enough to show that something knew where it was. Miles finally ran to the living room and turned every light on. I followed him. We stayed there until our parents came home just after midnight. They found us on the sofa, the television blaring, all the lights on, the the board still open on the dining room table. My father unlocked the hall door without any trouble. He said it had not been locked. Miles and I both heard him say that. We both watched him open it. The hallway beyond was empty. The laundry room door was closed. The basement door was closed. The tile floor was clean. Our parents were angry about the board and the lights and the fact that we had eaten nothing but the edges of the pizza. They did not believe the rest. The next morning, I found the quarter on the dining room floor. It was lying just outside the hallway door, bright side up, though neither of us had picked it up after it rolled there. One side had been scratched with a word so fine I had to hold it near the window to read it. Hall. On the other side, pressed around Washington's profile in tiny uneven letters, was another word. Next. Miles told me to throw it away. I did not. For years, I kept it in a small tin at the back of my desk drawer, because part of me believed that if I knew where it was, it could not turn up somewhere worse. I lost it when I moved out for college, or I thought I did. Last winter, during a week of hard rain, I came home late and found a quarter lying in front of my apartment's laundry room door. I did not touch it. I stepped over it, went inside, and locked every door I could find. That story belongs to the hallway. This next one belongs below the house, where the warning is not about locking something out, but leaving before something comes up. The basement session. The first thing my neighbor told me about the house was that the previous owner never used the basement. We were standing beside the moving truck when he said it. Rainwater ran from the brim of his cap, and he kept looking past me toward the small ground-level windows along the foundation. Nothing wrong with it, he added. He just preferred upstairs. At the time, I assumed he meant the stairs were difficult for an older man. The previous owner had lived alone, and the basement steps were steep, unfinished wood. I thanked my neighbor for the warning and forgot about it. I had bought the house after a divorce, mostly because it was affordable and far enough from my old neighborhood to feel like a clean break. For the first few weeks, I spent every evening unpacking alone. The rain helped. It filled the silence without asking anything from me. The basement was half storage room, half workshop. A bare bulb hung above a heavy wooden bench. Paint cans lined one wall. Old furnace filters, jars of nails, and pieces of pipe filled the shelves. The concrete floor had a long crack that ran from the furnace toward the center of the room, then disappeared beneath the workbench. I found the Ouija board behind 3 paint cans. It was wrapped in a gray cloth and tied with electrical wire. There was no box. The board looked handmade, cut from a single piece of wood with the letters burned into the surface. The planchette was tucked underneath it. A strip of masking tape crossed the back. In faded ink, someone had written, "If it moves, go upstairs." I assumed the previous owner had been entertaining himself. I peeled the tape away and left it beside the paint cans. I set both on the workbench and kept cleaning. That should have been the end of it. But living alone changes the scale of foolish decisions. There is no one nearby to laugh at an idea, no one to say it aloud and make it sound as bad as it is. By 10 that night, rain was drumming through the gutter beside the basement window, and I was sitting on a stool in front of the board with one hand on the planchette. I told myself I was testing it. "Is anyone here?" I asked. The planchette moved to yes. I lifted my hand. It stopped. I tried again, pressing with only 2 fingers this time. "Where are you?" The pointer moved across the burned letters. UNDER under. I looked at the ceiling first, which made no sense. The house was above me. There was nothing under the basement except earth and foundation. "Under the house?" I asked. The planchette moved faster. UPSTAIRS. Then NOW, upstairs now. The warning was so direct that I almost obeyed it. I remember turning toward the stairs. Warm kitchen light fell across the first few steps. It would have taken 10 seconds to leave the basement. Instead, I looked back at the board. Being ordered out of my own basement irritated me more than it frightened me. I had spent years feeling like a visitor in someone else's plans. The house was the first thing that felt entirely mine. "Who are you?" I asked. The planchette moved beneath my fingers. It spelled the number of the house, then the street name, then the town, my full address. I stopped breathing for a moment. The board had not answered who. It had answered where. Before I could ask another question, the planchette moved again. Belowyou, below you. The bulb above the workbench began to hum. It had made noise before, but this was lower and stronger vibration I could feel through the wood under my elbows. Dust shifted on the shelves. The jars of nails gave a faint metallic rattle. Then something knocked beneath the concrete floor. 3 slow knocks. Not from the wall. Not from the pipes. Directly under the stool where I was sitting. I stood so quickly that the stool fell backward. The planchette continued moving with no hand on it. Upstairs. It crossed the board and began again. Upstairs. The knocking moved toward the workbench. 3 knocks beneath the concrete. A pause. Then 3 more, slightly closer. The crack in the floor seemed darker than it had a moment before. I knew it was only a crack. I knew concrete did not open because someone knocked beneath it. Still, I watched a thin line of dust lift from its edges as though air were moving upward through it. The planchette spelled the word a 3rd time. Upstairs. This time, the final S was cut short when the planchette slid off the board and fell onto the floor. It landed glass side down beside the crack. Something knocked directly beneath it. I ran. I left the stool, the board, and every light burning. I took the stairs 2 at a time and stopped in the kitchen with my back against the wall, listening to the basement breathe below me. For several minutes, the house was silent except for rain. Then the basement light switched off. The thin line of brightness at the basement threshold disappeared. 3 knocks sounded under the kitchen tile. Then 3 more, closer to my feet. Then everything stopped. I did not sleep. At sunrise, I called my neighbor and asked whether he knew anything about the basement. He was quiet long enough that I knew the answer was yes. He said the previous owner had complained about knocking under the floor. Contractors had checked the foundation and found nothing. After that, the man stored everything in the garage and stopped going down there. I waited until full daylight before going downstairs. The bulb was still off, though the switch had not moved. The stool lay where it had fallen. The workbench was bare. The Ouija board was gone. The gray cloth and electrical wire were gone too. Dusty footprints crossed the basement floor from the workbench to the stairs. They looked like bare feet, but the toes were too close together, almost fused. The prints continued up the steps and into the kitchen. They led to the front door. They did not continue outside. I searched the house for the board and never found it. For a while I tried to live normally. I sealed the crack in the basement floor. I replaced the bulb. I moved the workbench to the garage. None of it changed the knocking. It returned only during rain. Always 3 knocks. Always beneath the center of the basement. Sometimes after a pause, the pattern repeated from beneath the kitchen floor. I sold the house 11 months later. The new owners were a young couple with a child. During the final walkthrough, the husband asked why the basement smelled like wet concrete after rain. I told him old houses held moisture. That was the last time I entered the house. But sometimes, during heavy rain, I still hear the same pattern where I live now. 3 knocks beneath the floor. Then a pause. Then the numbers of my old street address tapped out slowly from below. Some warnings tell you where not to stand. Others tell you what not to answer. In the next story, the rain itself becomes part of the session. The name in the rain. The rental cabin was supposed to help Rowan sleep. That was how he described the trip when he invited me. A quiet weekend by the lake, no work, no messages, no people asking whether he was doing better. His brother Caleb had died 6 months earlier, and every conversation in Rowan's life had become a careful inspection of his grief. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road beneath tall pines. From the porch, we could see a narrow strip of lake through the trees. It looked peaceful when we arrived on Friday afternoon. By evening, the storm had erased it. Rain covered the windows in moving sheets. The road disappeared beneath water and shadow. Wind pressed through the trees, but the cabin itself barely moved. It felt sealed away from the world, small and warm under a roof that took the full weight of the weather. The owner had left a stack of board games in a cupboard beside the fireplace. Most were missing pieces. At the bottom was an old Ouija board with a wooden planchette tied to it by a piece of red string. A paper tag hung from the string. On one side, someone had written, "When the rain speaks, do not answer." Rowan read it twice, then smiled. He said the owner knew how to make a cheap rental memorable. Rowan found it while looking for cards. Every cabin has one, he said. People get bored when it rains. I told him we should play something else. He held the board against his chest and asked whether I believed it worked. I said no. Good, he said. Then it can't hurt anything. We set it on the low table between the sofa and the fireplace. The power had flickered twice, so we switched off most of the lights and kept one lamp burning near the kitchen. Rain struck the roof hard enough to blur every other sound. Rowan sat across from me. One question, he said. I knew which question before he asked it. Rowan rested 2 fingers on the wooden pointer and waited for me to do the same. One question, he repeated, softer this time. For a while the board stayed quiet. Then the pointer slid toward the letters. R-A-I-N. Rowan smiled faintly. Not very original, he said. He asked whether Caleb was there. The planchette moved to no. That answer hurt him more than I expected. His shoulders dropped. He looked toward the dark windows, as if the board had confirmed an absence he had spent months trying not to accept. I suggested we stop. Before either of us could move the planchette to goodbye, it began spelling again. C-A-L-E-B. Rowan looked up. Then the planchette moved faster. D-O-N-O-T-A-N-S-W-E-R, do not answer. I thought it meant we should not ask Caleb another question. Rowan thought it meant Caleb could hear us but was unable to reply. We were both wrong. The first voice came from beyond the wall behind him. Rowan. It was soft and nearly lost beneath the rain. I might have dismissed it as wind moving through the porch railing, but Rowan went completely still. Did you hear that? He asked. The planchette moved under our fingers. Do not answer. The voice came again. Rowan. This time it sounded closer to the window beside the fireplace. Rowan whispered, Caleb? The moment he answered, the rain changed. It did not grow heavier. It narrowed. The storm continued against the roof and the trees, but every drop striking the cabin seemed to gather against one window. The glass beside the fireplace shook under a dense, steady pressure. The other windows went almost silent. The planchette moved. I-T-H-A-S-Y-O-U-R-V-I-C-E-N-O-W. It has your voice now. Rowan pulled his hands away. Outside something called my name. It used Rowan's voice. Not a rough imitation. Not a recording. It sounded exactly like him, including the slight break he had developed after Caleb's funeral when he was tired or trying not to cry. I told Rowan not to speak again. He stared at the window. Through the water running down the glass, a figure stood between the trees. I could not see a face, only a person-shaped darkness where the rain seemed to bend around something solid. Rowan stood. That's him, he said. I caught his arm before he reached the window. He tried to pull away. He said Caleb had stood the same way when he waited outside their childhood home, one shoulder lower than the other. He said nobody else could know that. The planchette moved without our hands. D-O-N-O-T-L-E-T-H-I-M-O-P-E-N. Do not let him open. The latch on the window lifted halfway. Neither of us had touched it. Rowan stopped fighting me. The voice outside said his name again, but this time it used my voice. Then Caleb's, then Rowan's own. 3 versions of the same invitation, braided together beneath the sound of water. We pushed the window shut and held the latch down. The figure remained between the trees. It never approached. It only stood there while the rain beat against that single pane. I reached back toward the table and pulled the board closer without letting go of Rowan. We said goodbye together. The planchette slid to goodbye, and the pressure against the window stopped. The rain returned to the whole cabin at once. The shape among the trees was gone. We did not sleep. We sat on the kitchen floor until dawn with every window locked and the board face down beneath a chair. In the morning, the storm had weakened to a fine gray drizzle. Outside the window, the mud was smooth except for one pair of footprints. They began at the tree line and ended several feet from the cabin. Both feet faced us. There were no prints leading to that spot and none leading away. On the outside of the glass, written through the condensation in long, careful letters, were the words, "Thank you for answering." Rowan never spoke about Caleb for the rest of the trip. Months later, he told me he no longer believed the voice had come from the trees. That was only where we expected a voice to be. He remembered the first time it called his name, before anything stood outside. The sound had not crossed the yard or passed through the wall. It had formed inside the rain as it touched the glass. That was a warning in a voice someone wanted badly to hear. The next one is a deadline, with only 3 minutes left to listen. Stop at midnight at 11:57 p.m., the board told us to stop. 3 minutes should have been enough time to listen. The office holiday party had ended hours earlier. By 11, the rented tables were gone, the music had stopped, and the top floor of the building belonged to 3 people who had made the mistake of volunteering for cleanup. There was Vince from accounting, Naomi from design, and me. Rain had been falling since sunset. The conference room windows showed only smudged city lights, and every other company on our floor had already closed. The elevators stood silent at the end of the corridor, and the motion sensor lights kept switching off in rooms we had just left. We were nearly finished when Vince found the Ouija board. Someone had brought it for the White Elephant Exchange. The price limit was $20, and the gifts were mostly mugs, desk toys, and things people already wanted to throw away. The board had been opened once, laughed at, then abandoned beside the recycling bins. Vince carried it into the break room. 5 minutes, he said. Then we go home. Naomi pointed at the microwave clock. 11:49. 2 minutes, she said. We sat around the small round table between half-empty soda cans and paper plates crusted with dried frosting. The fluorescent lights above us were too bright, but everything beyond the break room door looked dim. The planchette was thin plastic. It clicked softly against the cardboard when Vince drew it to the center. "Anybody working late?" he asked. It slid to yes. He asked where. WORK. "That makes 4 of us," Vince said. Naomi did not smile. The plastic clicked again. LIGHT. The corridor light outside switched off. The break room remained bright, but the doorway now opened onto a dark hall. I could see the elevator display glowing red in the distance. 11:54. The display blinked even though no one had called it. It showed 12, went dark, then showed 12 again. Naomi said that if the doors opened by themselves, she was done cleaning for the night. Vince laughed too quickly. Naomi asked why the board kept referring to the room. The planchette moved to T, then I, then M, then E. Time. The microwave changed to 11:56. I said we should say goodbye and leave. Vince asked one more question. How much time? The planchette moved quickly. STOPBEFORE. Then the numbers. 1, 2. Stop before 12. The microwave clock read 11:57. At the end of the corridor, the elevator display stopped showing a floor number. It held on 2 red lines like a mouth that had not opened yet. Naomi lifted her hands. I did the same. Vince kept one finger on the planchette. That's exactly what a fake board would say, he told us. Give it a deadline. Make everyone nervous. I reminded him that he was the one moving it if it was fake. He looked at me, then removed his finger. The planchette continued moving. ITLOKSBACK. It looks back. Alev looks back. Naomi placed her fingers on the planchette and tried to guide it to goodbye. It resisted her, turning in a slow circle at the center of the board. Vince put his hands back. What happens at midnight? He asked. The microwave clock changed to 12. The lights in the break room flickered once. The planchette began to move. It no longer answered questions. It described us. Vince smiling. Vince stopped smiling. Naomi crying. Naomi touched her face. Her eyes were dry, your hand shaking. That one was for me. I could feel the tremor in my fingers against the plastic. The board moved faster. Break room door open. The door had been open all night. Hall light off. We already knew that. Then, someone standing. All 3 of us turned toward the corridor. No one was there. The red elevator display glowed at the far end. The rain pressed softly against the windows behind us. Somewhere in the building an air vent clicked on. The board moved again. Behind Vince. Vince turned. There was nothing behind him except the cabinet, the recycling bin, and the closed door of the supply closet. Then the elevator at the far end of the corridor chimed. Its red display changed from 12 to V, then to I, then to N, then to C, then to E. Vince. Naomi whispered that we had to stop. The board spelled, "Do not turn again." Vince stood. His chair rolled backward and touched the cabinet behind him. The elevator doors opened at the end of the dark hall. No one stepped out. The display still read Vince. The microwave still read 12. The board moved again, slow and precise. He looked. Naomi grabbed the planchette with both hands and forced it toward goodbye. I helped her. It felt as though someone on the opposite side of the board were pulling it away. Vince finally put his hand down beside ours. Together, we moved it to goodbye. The microwave changed to 12:01. The corridor lights switched on. We left the board on the table and took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. In the lobby, the security monitor still showed one elevator waiting on our floor with its doors open. The guard said that was impossible. The elevator had not moved since 10. The next morning, I found a voicemail from Vince. It had been sent at exactly 12 a.m. while he had been sitting beside me with his phone in his coat pocket. The recording contained 43 seconds of room noise, the ventilation system, rain against the glass, Naomi whispering that we should stop. Then Vince's voice, very close to the microphone. It knows where I'm looking. At work, the microwave clock was still frozen at 12. Facilities unplugged it and carried it into the hall. The display remained lit. Before they threw it away, Naomi pressed the minute button once. The display did not change to 12:01. It changed to Vince. Midnight changed the rules in that office. The next story is about a room that had one extra place set before anyone understood why. The empty chair. There were 5 chairs around the table when we arrived. That should not have mattered. The house belonged to Priya's aunt, and old dining rooms collect mismatched furniture the way attics collect boxes. 4 of us were staying there for the weekend, but there was no reason the room had to contain exactly 4 chairs. Still, the 5th one bothered me. It was narrower than the others, with a high carved back and a seat covered in faded green fabric. The other 4 chairs matched the table. That one looked as though it had been carried in from somewhere else and placed at the only open side. Priya's aunt had gone to visit family and asked us to watch the house. It stood outside town at the end of a long garden, surrounded by bare trees and wet fields. Rain began shortly after sunset and settled into a soft, even sound against the tall dining room windows. There were 4 of us, Priya, Mason, Taryn, and me. We found the Ouija board in the sideboard while looking for playing cards. It was beneath a stack of linen napkins, beside an old funeral program and several bundles of yellowed photographs. Mason carried it to the table with the pleased expression of someone who had just found exactly the wrong form of entertainment. Priya told him to put it back. Taryn said nothing. She was looking at the 5th chair. "Move that first," she said. Mason asked why. She said she did not want an empty seat beside her. I reached for the chair, but Mason stopped me. He said leaving it there made the room better, more symmetrical somehow. He pulled it slightly away from the table so no one could accidentally bump it. Then we sat in the 4 matching chairs and placed the board between us. At first, the planchette barely moved. Mason asked if anyone was there. Yes. Priya asked where. Room. Taryn asked how many people were present. The planchette moved to 5 Eve. Mason laughed. 4 people and one very talkative piece of cardboard. The planchette began spelling again. CHAIR. All 4 of us looked at the empty chair. It remained where Mason had placed it, angled away from the table. Taryn asked, "What about the chair?" The answer came quickly. "Move the chair." I lifted my hands from the planchette. Priya said we should listen. There was no reason not to. We could put it against the wall and keep playing if Mason insisted. He shook his head. "It's reacting to us," he said. "We made the chair important, so now the board is using it." That explanation was sensible enough to keep us seated. The warning had been direct. Moving the chair would have taken seconds. We ignored it because obeying would have made the game real. We put our hands back on the planchette. It moved before anyone asked a question, not empty. The rain seemed to soften outside. The chair still looked empty, but it was no longer angled away from the table. Its front legs now faced us directly. Priya said Mason had moved it with his foot. Mason held both feet up for us to see, grinning, though his face had lost some color. We asked another question. The board answered with a name none of us recognized. Edwin. While we argued about whether it belonged to someone in Priya's family, Taryn noticed the chair had moved again. Its front legs now touched the edge of the dining room rug. No one had seen it slide. We all watched it after that. For several minutes it remained still. The room felt muffled, the rain reduced to a distant hush. The old wall clock ticked above the sideboard. Somewhere deeper in the house, a radiator clicked as it cooled. Mason asked what Edwin wanted. The planchette moved. Do not offer seat. Priya looked toward the old funeral program in the open drawer. She said her grandmother used to warn children not to leave an empty chair at a table during a wake. An open seat could be mistaken for an invitation. Mason laughed once. Fine, he said, turning toward the fifth chair. Sit down, whoever you are. The chair scraped backward. It was a small movement, no more than 2 inches, but the sound of wood against the floor filled the room. The planchette moved beneath our fingers. Thank you. Then, now ask. Nobody asked anything. The chair moved forward again, stopping close enough that its seat touched the edge of the table. The cushion sank slowly in the center, not far, only enough to suggest weight. Taryn began saying goodbye. Priya joined her. Mason kept staring at the depression in the fabric, but finally repeated the word. I moved the planchette to goodbye with them. The moment it stopped, the rain returned at full volume. We left the board on the table and went upstairs. No one wanted to cross the dining room again that night. In the morning, the fifth chair was pushed neatly under the table. The green seat was level again. 5 damp circles marked the tabletop, each the size of the bottom of a drinking glass. We had used only 4 glasses, and all 4 were still in the kitchen. The Ouija board was gone. In its place lay the funeral program from the sideboard drawer. It had been folded open to the name of the deceased. Edwin Vale. The service had taken place in that house 32 years earlier. We put the program back and moved the fifth chair against the wall before leaving. Priya's aunt called her that evening. She asked why we had rearranged the dining room. Priya apologized and said we had moved 1 chair. Her aunt went quiet. There are only 4 chairs in that room, she said. When Priya returned the following weekend, the green chair was gone. But 5 damp circles still appeared on the table whenever it rained. An empty chair is one kind of proof. A photograph is another, especially when it keeps what should have been deleted. The photo I have never liked taking pictures during things that were meant to be private. I always felt a private moment changed when someone tried to keep it. A bad idea became a scene people could laugh about later. That was why I told Lila to put her phone away before we started. Rain had turned the windows black. Grant lived on the 2nd floor of an old brick building near campus. There were 4 of us there. Me, Lila, Grant, and May. Grant had bought the cheap board that afternoon from a thrift store. $3 was written on masking tape across the lid. He placed it in the center of the coffee table like he was serving dinner. This is how every bad documentary starts, Lila said. Then she took a picture of it. May pulled her sleeves down over her hands. Can we not photograph everything tonight? Lila smiled. If something happens, you're going to want proof. If something happens, I said, I would rather not have proof. Grant turned off the overhead light. Lila placed her phone face up on the table with its flashlight on. Grant pulled the planchette to the center, and the rest of us barely touched it. When he asked whether anyone had followed the board home, it dragged beneath our fingertips and slid to yes. The room went quiet in a way that made the rain seem louder. Grant swallowed his smile. How many people are in this room? The planchette paused, then spelled 4. Good, Lila whispered. It can count. Grant asked another question. What do you see? This time the answer came faster. Flash. Lila made a small sound, half laugh and half breath. Even the board knows. Don't, May said. Lila had already picked up her phone. Grant leaned back, pleased with the tension. Now you have to, he said. The planchette jerked so sharply that May pulled her fingers away. We all stared as it began to move again. Do not take picture. Nobody laughed. Lila held the phone near her chest. On the screen, the camera was already open. Leela, I said, put it down. She looked at Grant. He said more quietly, if we stop every time a toy tells us to, this is going to be a boring night. May stood. I'm not in it. You're already in it, Leela said, meaning the picture. Then she raised the phone. The flash went off. For 1 white second, the living room lost all its depth. The rain, the board, our hands, Grant's sofa, May standing beside the table, everything flattened into a single bright shape. Nothing knocked. The lamp did not go out. Grant let out a breath through his nose. See? Then the planchette moved under the fingers Lila and I still had on it. You kept it. Lila lowered the phone slowly. Delete it, May said. Wait, Grant said. Let us see. I remember thinking that was the second mistake. The first had been taking the photo. Lila opened the picture. At first, it looked exactly like the room had looked. Grant sat on the sofa with one shoulder lifted. I was beside him on the rug. Lila's arm stretched into the frame. May stood half turned away, blurred because she had moved. The board was on the coffee table between us, bright from the flash. It's nothing, Grant said. May leaned closer. Her face changed before she spoke. Count the hands. We did. Grant's right hand was on the planchette. Mine was beside it. Lila's left hand was there too, her rings catching the flash. May had pulled both of her hands into her sleeves before she stood. There was another hand between mine and Grant's. It was pale, but not bright with the flash like ours. It looked slightly blurred, as if it had moved while the rest of us stayed still. The fingers were too long, laid gently over the plastic edge of the planchette. Lila pinched the screen to zoom in. In the far corner of the living room, someone was sitting cross-legged on the floor. The corner had been empty when we sat down. Grant had moved a dying plant from that spot to make room for the thrift store bag. There should have been nothing there except floorboards, baseboard, and shadow. But in the picture, someone was sitting there comfortably, as if they had been invited long before we arrived. The person was turned toward the camera. The flash had caught only part of their face. One cheek, one eye, the line of a mouth that did not seem to be smiling. The pointer dragged across the board again. Delete it. Lila tapped the trash icon. A confirmation message appeared. She pressed delete. The picture disappeared for half a second, then returned to the camera roll as if it had only refreshed. Do it again, May said. Lila did. The photo stayed. Each time she opened it, the person in the corner seemed closer. Not by much. That was the worst part. Only a few inches across the floor. The eye clearer. The hand on the planchette less blurred. Grant kept saying it was compression, motion blur, some weird thing phones did in low light. He said all the words people say when they need the world to go back to having rules. Then he took the phone from Lila, turned toward the empty corner, and raised it. There is nothing there, he said. So let's prove there is nothing there. Grant, I said. The flash went off a second time. The board answered before the image appeared. Now it has two. The second photo showed the corner empty. For a few seconds we all breathed again. Then May pointed behind Lila's image. Someone stood close enough that she should have felt breath on her neck. Its face was hidden by the angle of its head, and one arm was raised. It was holding up a phone. None of us touched the board after that. We left Grant's apartment before midnight, all of us stepping around the coffee table because nobody wanted to pass too close to the corner. Lila kept trying to delete the photos on the stairs. By the time we reached the front door, both images were still there. The next morning, she called me before 8. Her voice was very calm, which was how I knew she had been crying. There's another one, she said. I did not ask another what. She sent it anyway. It was a photo of Grant's living room in the gray light before morning. The lamp was off. The board was still on the coffee table. The rain had stopped. All four of us were asleep. Grant on the sofa, May curled in the chair with her hood up, Lila on the rug, one hand under her cheek. Me sitting against the wall, chin dropped forward. We had not slept there. I know we had not slept there. And the picture had been taken from the empty corner. At the bottom of the frame, close to the lens, were two pale knees folded neatly on the floor. That story leaves evidence on a phone. The next leaves evidence in the object itself. Two planchettes and one instruction that should not have been tested. The second planchette. My Aunt Miriam kept everything. She kept used birthday candles, keys without labels, buttons in envelopes, and photographs of houses no one in our family recognized. So when Clara and I cleared out her attic after the funeral, nothing felt surprising at first. Rain clicked against the roof. One bare bulb hung near the stairs, leaving the far end of the attic in shadow. Clara wanted to sort fast and leave before dark. Ben came to carry boxes. He was not family, so he could throw things away without feeling accused. Your aunt had a system, he said, holding up a coffee tin full of drawer handles. Her system was not throwing anything out, Clara said. I was kneeling beside a low stack of flat boxes near the back wall when I found the board. The soft gray box had no picture on its lid, only the word "talk" in faded marker. Inside was an old Ouija board. The board was wooden, its letters painted by hand. Goodbye nearly disappeared into a crack at the lower edge. There were 2 planchettes in the box. The first was wooden, dark with age, with a cloudy glass circle set into the center. The second was pale plastic. It lay beneath the velvet lining, newer and lighter, with an empty round hole instead of glass. Ben leaned over my shoulder. Maybe it came with a spare. Clara did not smile. She reached into the lid and peeled up a folded piece of paper taped to the inside. On it, in my aunt's handwriting, were 2 short instructions. Only use one, burn the other. We should have closed the box, but grief makes strange things feel like messages, and the attic was full of Miriam's notes. It was easy to pretend these instructions were no different. So when Ben asked if we wanted to try it, I did not say no quickly enough. We set the board on an old trunk. Clara watched while Ben and I touched the wooden planchette. "If Aunt Miriam is here," Ben said, "tell us where she hid the expensive jewelry." Clara gave him a look. "Sorry," he said, respectfully. The bulb hummed. Then the planchette slid to yes. Ben's smile faded. I asked, "Where are you?" The planchette moved slowly, dragging beneath our fingers. "Attic." Clara stepped closer despite herself. "Who are you?" I asked. "Miriam." My throat tightened so suddenly that I hated myself for asking the next question. "Are you Aunt Miriam?" The planchette stopped in the center. Then it moved to no. Ben looked at Clara. "That is actually good. If one of you was pushing, you would have said yes." "Stop," Clara said. But Ben had already picked up the pale plastic planchette from the box. "What happens if we use the spare?" "The note says to burn it," I said. "It says only use one. It doesn't say why." He placed the plastic planchette on the board near the numbers. The wooden one moved under our fingers before anyone asked anything. "Burn the other one." Clara backed away from the trunk. "We are done." "That's a little theatrical," Ben said, but his voice had changed. "Take it off," I told him. He lifted his hands from the wooden planchette, but he did not remove the plastic one. For a moment, both pieces sat still on the board, separated by the painted alphabet. Then the plastic planchette moved. No one was touching it. It slid to no. The wooden planchette moved at the same time, under no one's hands, and stopped on yes. Ben whispered, "Did you see that?" Clara was already crying, but quietly, with one hand pressed over her mouth. The wooden planchette moved again. "Leave." The plastic one answered, "Stay." The wooden one circled once, slow and deliberate, then spelled, "Not her." The plastic one scraped across the board, harder now, as if its hollow center were trying to catch on every painted letter. Mine. I remember the sound more than anything. Not loud, just 2 small objects moving on old wood in a rainy attic, one smooth and heavy, one thin and dry. They did not move like toys. They moved like hands writing from opposite sides of a door. Ben stepped closer. "There has to be a magnet," he said. "There is no magnet," Clara said. The wooden planchette moved to the lower corner. "Do not touch it." Ben looked at me, embarrassed by how scared he already was. "If it stops when I touch it," he said, "then we know." "Ben, don't." He placed 2 fingers on the plastic planchette. It stopped instantly. The attic became so still that I could hear rain running through the gutter outside the wall. Then the wooden planchette began to spell. "Now it knows you." Ben pulled his hand back as if the plastic had burned him. That was when Clara grabbed the pale planchette from the board. She moved faster than either of us expected, taking it by the edge and carrying it to the small cast-iron fireplace built into the attic wall. Miriam had never used it as far as I knew. It was full of old ash and dry leaves that had fallen down the flue. Clara struck 3 matches before one stayed lit. The plastic planchette did not burn. It softened. That was worse. It bent inward around the hole, the edges curling like something trying to close. A sour smell filled the attic. Clara covered her mouth with her sleeve. Ben kept staring at his fingers. When the flame died, the planchette lay in the ash, warped and pale, but not destroyed. We left it there. We left the board on the trunk. We left the boxes open and went downstairs without turning off the attic light. Clara locked the door at the bottom of the stairs and took the key home with her. though none of us said what good that would do. The next morning, I found the wooden planchette in my coat pocket. I had not taken it. I had not put on that coat after leaving Miriam's house. It was hanging by my front door, still damp at the shoulders from the rain. The planchette was warm when I pulled it out. On the underside, scratched into the dark wood, were 4 words. I told you. I called Clara before I called Ben. She drove back to the house with the attic key, and neither of us spoke as we climbed the stairs. The bare bulb was still on. The board was still on the trunk. The box was open beside it. Inside, the pale plastic planchette was back in its place, perfectly flat, clean, not burned at all. It rested on the velvet cloth beneath the handwritten note. Only use one, burn the other. Clara started backing toward the stairs. Then I saw where the wooden planchette had settled on the board. It was not on goodbye. It was not in the center. It was resting across 3 painted letters, as neatly as if someone had placed it there while we were gone. B-E-N. The last 2 stories are about grief and returning. First, a family tries to say goodbye to someone they miss and teaches the wrong thing how to answer. The last goodbye after Daniel's funeral, nobody wanted to be the first to leave. The house had been full all afternoon, neighbors bringing food, cousins speaking softly in hallways, someone washing cups in the kitchen and putting them in the wrong cabinets. By evening, most people had gone, but a few of us stayed because Aunt Elise looked too small in the living room by herself. Rain moved quietly against the windows. Not a storm, just a steady gray rain that softened the streetlights and made the glass look colder than it was. Daniel had been my mother's brother, but Aunt Elise was the one who had grown up closest to him. They were only 11 months apart. In old photographs, they looked almost like twins. Daniel tall and narrow, Elise small and bright-eyed, both squinting into the sun at family picnics and lake trips. At the funeral, Elise had held herself together better than any of us. That night, in the quiet after everyone left, she finally began to shake. Mark, her son, sat beside her on the sofa with one arm around her shoulders. I sat on the floor near the coffee table, still wearing the black dress shoes that had pinched my feet all day. 2 lamps and a muted television lit the room. "He always hated goodbyes," Elise said. Mark rubbed her shoulder. "I know. Even as a child, he would just disappear from a room when it was time to leave." She smiled a little, and then the smile broke. That was when my cousin Nora opened the hall closet looking for extra blankets and found the board. It was behind a stack of old family games, Scrabble, dominoes, a box of cards with half the deck missing. The Ouija board was in a flat cardboard box with one side caved in. Inside the lid, in Grandma's narrow handwriting, were 2 rules. If it says no, stop. Do not teach it. "I forgot Grandma kept this," she said. Annalise looked up. For the first time all evening, something like interest moved across her face. "Daniel used to joke about that thing," she said. "He said if he died first, I should ask where he hid all my missing earrings." Nora showed her the writing inside the lid. Elise barely glanced at it. "Grandma wrote warnings on everything." Mark stood immediately. "No." "I'm not serious," Elise said, but she was already looking at the box. Mark took it from Nora and held it against his chest. "Mom, bad idea. I only want to say goodbye." No one answered that. It was too hard a sentence to argue with, so we cleared the coffee table. That was the mistake we all helped make. Elise sat on one side, Mark beside her. I sat opposite them because I did not want her doing it with only Mark there to stop her. Nora stayed near the doorway, arms folded tightly across her stomach. We placed the board between cups of cold coffee and paper plates of untouched food. The rain ticked softly against the window behind Elise. The planchette felt light under our fingers. Mark said, "If this feels wrong, we stop." Elise nodded without looking at him. I asked the first question because nobody else would. "Is anyone here with us?" For almost a minute, nothing happened. Then the planchette moved to yes. Elise inhaled sharply. Mark closed his eyes. "Daniel?" Elise whispered. "Is that you?" The planchette moved slowly. N.O., Elise's face changed, not into fear, but disappointment so deep that it hurt to see. "Ask again," she said. Mark shook his head. "Mom, please." So she asked herself, "Daniel, are you here?" The planchette moved with more force this time. Nothim, not him. The words sat between us. clear as anything the board could have said. Mark pulled his hands away. That's enough. Elise kept her fingers on the planchette. It might not understand, she said. It understands, Mark said. It answered. The planchette pulled under only Elise's fingers and mine, not him. Then, after a pause, do not teach it. I still think that was the moment we should have ended it. Not when it got frightening. Not when it got personal. Right there, while the warning was plain. But Elise was crying by then. Daniel called me Little Lamp, she said suddenly. When we were small and the power went out at the lake house, I would carry the flashlight because he said I was braver than him. Mom, Mark said. She kept going, speaking to the board now, not to us. Do you remember that? The lake house? The storm? Grandma singing Blue Moon in the kitchen because she was scared too? The planchette did not move at first. Then it went to no. Elise wiped her cheeks. He would remember. Then it is not him, I said quietly. She did not look at me. Daniel hated tomatoes, she said. He hid them in napkins. He broke his wrist falling out of the apple tree. He used to tap twice on my bedroom wall when he could not sleep. With every detail, the room felt smaller. Not colder, not darker. Just more attentive. The pointer answered, apple. Elise made a sound like she had been touched. Then, blue. Nora whispered, it is using what you said. Elise shook her head hard, like a child refusing medicine. This time the answer came without hesitation. Little Lamp. Elise began to sob. Mark reached for her hands, but she held tighter to the planchette. Danny? The board answered, yes. For 1 second I understood why she believed it. Grief does not ask for proof. It asks for one impossible mercy, and then punishes you for wanting it. The board gave another answer. It listens. I looked at Mark. He had seen it too. The way the answer seemed to come from somewhere beside the conversation, not inside it. Then, stop saying his name. Mom, Mark said, and this time he took her wrists. Elise tried to pull away. Wait, please, just one question. No, Daniel, she said louder. Are you still with us? The planchette moved beneath all our hands. I-A-N-O-W, I am now. Nora started crying by the door. Mark dragged Elise's hands away from the board, but the planchette continued moving. Thank you for making him. The room seemed to stop breathing. I said goodbye first. I do not know why I remembered to do it. Maybe because every story about those boards ends with someone forgetting. I put both hands on the planchette and pushed it toward goodbye. It resisted, not hard, but with the stubborn weight of someone leaning back. Mark helped me. Then Nora. Finally, Elise whispered goodbye too, though she said it like an apology. The planchette reached goodbye and stopped. We put the board back in the box. Mark wrapped tape around it 6 times and carried it to the hall closet. None of us spoke while he shoved it behind the other games. I stayed the night because I did not want Elise alone. The rain kept going past midnight. I slept on the sofa in my funeral clothes and woke sometime before dawn to whispering in the kitchen. At first I thought Elise was on the phone. Then I heard her pause, listen, and answer someone who had not spoken. Yes, she whispered. He used to say that too. I stood in the doorway. Elise sat at the kitchen table in the gray morning light. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her. She looked exhausted, but peaceful in a way that frightened me more than crying had. There was a piece of paper on the table. At the top, in Elise's handwriting, it said, "He remembers everything now." Underneath, the same words had been written again, but deeper, pressing through the paper so hard the letters had torn in places. Keep telling me. And for the final story, the warning is not hidden at all. They know the rule before they begin. They even follow it once. Then someone reaches back. Goodbye was not enough. We had not all been in the same room for almost 12 years. June rented the guest house because a restaurant reunion would last 2 hours before we disappeared into our separate lives again. The guest house stood between wet fields and dark trees. Rain started before dinner and kept tapping the roof long after the windows turned black. There were 4 of us. June, who organized everything. Theo, still as calm as he had been in high school. Jonah, unable to sit still without making a joke, and me. We had once known each other's parents, secrets, old addresses, and first heartbreaks. We also shared one summer night with June's Ouija board that none of us had spoken about since, until the rain brought it back. After midnight, with the fire burned low, Jonah found the box among the games on a shelf. "No way," he said. June looked over and went still. The board was June's, kept in the same torn black box we remembered. She took it from Jonah carefully. "We are not doing that," Theo said. Jonah grinned. "You scared?" "Yes," Theo said. That made Jonah laugh, but only for a second. June set the box on the coffee table. "If we do it, we follow the rules." "There were rules?" Jonah asked. "There are always rules," she said. She opened the box and unfolded the board. The planchette was wrapped in an old blue handkerchief, the same one she used to keep around it when we were 17. June looked at each of us before she placed it down. "First rule," she said. "Everyone keeps a hand on the planchette. Nobody lets one person do it alone." Theo nodded. "Second rule, nobody asks when they will die." Jonah lifted both hands. "Fine." "Third rule," June said, and this time her voice changed. "When we say goodbye, nobody touches the board again." The rain filled the silence after that. I almost told her to put it away, but nostalgia can make fear feel like a place you once lived. We sat around the coffee table, 4 adults pretending we were only remembering. June unwrapped the planchette and set it down like something fragile. The fire shifted. Jonah made one quiet joke about a haunted weekend, but no one laughed. June asked, "Do you remember this room?" The planchette slid steadily to yes, familiar enough that my stomach tightened. Theo asked, "Do you remember us?" The planchette answered, "Old." Jonah swallowed. "Rude." Then it moved again. 4. June's eyes stayed on the board. "What do you want?" she asked. The planchette circled once, slow and careful, then spelled, "Remember." The session continued with calm, vague answers. It did not feel safe, but it felt controlled. Then June said, "We are ending now." The planchette moved before she could guide it down. "Goodbye once." Jonah stopped smiling. Theo read the words under his breath. The planchette moved again. "Do not return." June looked at all of us. "Say it together." Nobody argued. We said goodbye, all 4 of us. The planchette slid down to goodbye and stopped so suddenly that it felt as if a hand had lifted from the other side. June kept her fingers on it for another second. "Again," she said. We said it again, but the planchette did not move. It stayed on goodbye. Then June removed her hand. One by one, we did the same. For several minutes, nothing happened. That is the part I keep thinking about. The part where it was over. The room became ordinary again. The rain softened. The fire settled. Theo exhaled and leaned back. June folded the board carefully and set the planchette beside it on the blue handkerchief. We had done it right. Jonah stood and walked to the kitchen. He came back with a glass of water and that embarrassed grin people wear after being more frightened than they meant to be. "Well," he said, "it never answered my real question." June's head snapped up. "Don't." But he had already put the glass down. "I'm not starting anything," he said. He reached toward the table with one finger. It was such a small thing. That is what makes it hard to forgive. Not a ritual, not a challenge, not even real bravery. Just one finger pressed lightly against the planchette after everyone had been told not to touch it again. "Are you still here?" Jonah asked. The planchette moved under his finger. "You came back." Jonah pulled away as if he had touched a flame. June did not speak. Her face had gone pale in the firelight. The planchette moved again with no one touching it. 4 left. Theo stood. It continued. 5 returned. I counted us before I could stop myself. June by the sofa, Theo near the armchair, Jonah frozen beside the table, me on the rug. 4. Only 4. The folded board lay half open now, though I had not seen it move. The planchette sat above the letters like it was waiting for us to notice something obvious. It spelled, "Do not say goodbye again." "No," June whispered. Theo looked at her. "We have to close it." "It said not to." "It said a lot of things." June shook her head. "Theo." He was trying to be calm for us. I know that. He had always been the one who could make decisions when the rest of us froze. He stepped closer to the table, palms open, not touching the planchette. "Goodbye," he said. From behind us, someone repeated it in Jonah's voice. "Goodbye." Jonah was standing in front of me. His mouth was closed. For a moment, no one moved. Then the rain seemed to grow louder all at once, filling the guest house, pressing against the windows, rushing in the gutters like something had leaned its weight against the roof. June grabbed my wrist and pulled me up. We left the board where it was. Nobody slept. We spent the rest of the night in the kitchen with all the lights on. Jonah sat at the table with both hands wrapped around the glass of water he never drank. Theo kept apologizing in a low voice. June did not answer him. At dawn, the rain slowed to a mist. The living room looked smaller in morning light, less like a place where something impossible had happened, more like a room we had failed to understand. The board was unfolded on the coffee table. The planchette rested on goodbye. Around it were 5 wet fingertip marks, not on the board itself, on the table, as if 5 damp fingers had been resting there, just outside the edge, waiting for permission. We packed before breakfast. None of us discussed keeping in touch on the drive home. That promise would have sounded too much like another goodbye. Years have passed since that weekend. I have not seen Jonah or Theo in person since. June sends a card every December with no message inside except her name. Most days I can make it feel like something that happened to younger versions of us, though we were not young at all. But sometimes it rains hard enough that phone lines sound thin and far away. On those nights when a call ends and I say goodbye out of habit, I wait. There is always one quiet second after the line goes dead, and then very softly in Jonah's voice, something says goodbye back. That was the Ouija Sleep Files, 13 warnings that came early enough to matter. If you are still awake, let the rest of the rain play out. If you want more slow Ouija stories, the next file is already being built.